All right, Kyle, I've got a hot take. It's popular in the news, and I'm back from vacation. So, is the Lambda AI sentient? That's the hot take.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, that's a big no.
All right, let me give you the layperson's take because, I mean, despite the fact that I'm not a
Sure.
layperson, I'm certainly, compared to you, a layperson. I absolutely not. I agree. But I will give some credence to the fact that when you read it, and if you read it as a layperson, it does seem creepy. So I read some of it, or quite a decent amount, to my wife, who was, creeped out by it. It does sound bizarre that it's actually seemingly questioning its own existence, etc. Now, it just reads that way. The questions that I would start asking as I unpack it, and the reason that I say no is simply that I have no idea what they trained it on, what type of material it's read. I mean, if it's been reading a lot of science fiction, if they've trained it on science fiction, if they've trained it on various thought pieces about sentience, what was the purpose of this? How did they train it? Because a lot of those questions are asked over and over again in different mediums, right? Different types of science fiction novels or even scholarly articles, I'm sure. So from that perspective, it just seems like it's regurgitating quite a lot of folklore and ideas about what it might mean to be sentient.
Yeah, regurgitation is a really good way to put it. It's able to detect the kind of the topic you were asking it about and the milieu of other topics and ideas that surround it and, generate sentences that are reasonable responses. There's nothing particularly insightful going on here.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, Lemoyne I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he was the Google employee, I think no longer a Google employee.
Yeah.
He went out with the purpose of trying to demonstrate sentience, correct?
I looked a little deeper into this because actually my first reaction is just my real hot take when I heard about this guy is I assumed it was mental illness. So I went and watched an interview with him, not mentally ill, not that I could judge that either way, but I no longer think that. I think this is 100% a marketing ploy he's doing
For Google or on it for his own
for
self?
himself.
Okay.
I guess with that in mind, to answer your question, he would say he wasn't necessarily trying to prove it was sentient. He was testing it for bias, which was his job, and stuff like that. Yet through these other processes, he was deceived or self-deceived or is making it up, one of the two.
Right. So, but how does I'm not sure of his background, but I suspect that it's in data science of some form. Do you know?
I didn't validate, but let's presume he's like Stanford PhD, something like that.
How does someone in that position make that, leap when someone who is in my position, who is not a, Stanford PhD, can easily write it off as, a part of the training mechanism and regurgitation. And that leads me down the path of what you just said, that he's just doing it as a PR thing.
So, like I said, I'm 50-50 on that. I'm pretty confident it's just a PR move, but could he genuinely believe this? Possibly. I would say someone appropriately trained in AI would not make this mistake if he really understood the Turing test. Although he seems like he might in the interview. Like his complaint was Google refuses to let a Turing test happen. They have it automatically programmed. If you ask it if it's an AI, it has to say yes, which seems like a reasonable thing Google might want to do for chatbots or whatever in terms of just public interest of privacy. But that could easily be disabled for the purpose of any test that would be run. So I think that's a very disingenuous way of interpreting it. That's what led me to think, oh, I think this is phony baloney. But to be fooled by it, I could see that. If day in, day out, your job is to test it and you don't fully understand academic sides of AI and you get little glimmers of hope here and there. Something weird happens. It says a surprising response once in a while. Remember the hits, forget the misses. That may be what happened.
I also wonder how much of what was published was selected excerpts that sounded really good, right? Because what about
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
what about in between the conversations where it was good and he selected those pieces? Was it a bunch of obvious, clearly this is a bot spouting gibberish.
Most likely, you'll recall when GPT-3 came out, and it had everybody was in the media talking about this fake news article about unicorns and the guy who studies unicorns that it generated. They had to do, I think, like 10 random walks before they got to that one. That was the best one. The first 9, they chose not to publish because they were all not quite as good. And I expect you'd have exactly the same sort of ratio in Lambda.
What I can say is that if my wife had the interaction from some of those excerpts that did come out, if she had the typing interaction, she would think that this is a machine, or not a machine. This isn't a human, right? I could see that in the excerpts because it was, it seemed like very human-like conversation. It wasn't the, I don't know, what do you think about today? The very canned response. So props to them for having done a great job of having a more human-like experience. But that was in those excerpts. Now, if you were to say to my wife, talk to this, I want you to chat back and forth for the next hour with this thing, would she be suspect? She certainly would, is my guess. Despite the fact that she has nothing to do with computer science, she'd say there's something weird about that. She might not know it's a robot, but it would just, yeah, that person was off or weird or crazy.
Yeah, almost certainly. I think she would eventually figure out for sure, oh, this is some automated system that's highly advanced. But actually, even though I think it would fail that test, that is a weaker test than what it actually needs to pass. There's an important caveat that most people seem to overlook when they talk about the Turing test. Turing actually called it the imitation game. So it's not that you're talking to a chatbot and you think it's human. I mean, you could maybe book an airline ticket with a chatbot and never realize it's a bot. And that's fine because the number of conversations you might need to have to book an airline are pretty finite. So you wouldn't be fooled in that scenario. The Turing test specifically is the case where you're talking to one known human, one known machine, and the machine is actively trying to deceive you.
Really? See, now that I didn't know.
Yes.
Because there's a difference between going in knowing that a machine is actively trying to deceive me
100% different.
and not knowing whether or not what I'm talking to is or isn't a machine. So the burden of the proof is on the machine in one case. Well,
it's a test.
But
you set up a laboratory experiment like this, and after let people talk to each machine for 10 minutes or whatever it is, and then at the end say, which do you think is the human, which do you think was the machine? And by and large, you're going to get very accurate responses in 2022. Human beings can tell the difference between the most advanced AI and other humans. Hands down, yes.
I didn't know that. So that's really the full intent of the Turing test, is to be performed in such a fashion.
Yeah.
Are there very specific requirements? Like it has to be 5 machines, and you have to decide which one's human, or is it 10 for what duration, or is it fairly flexible?
No, all that's kind of flexible. I think some of it's like the pomp and circumstance of a test. These don't actually happen very often. There's the Loebner Prize that I haven't checked in on in a while, but that's the only most official thing. I bet you there's some universities that have little fun things for students to do. There aren't really official competitions because there don't need to be. On the day when we're getting close to this, there'll become some protocol and all those questions will be answered. But those are just minor details. It really doesn't matter. It's, can you tell the difference between one known human, one known machine, the machine's trying to deceive you?
Though he also took it a step further by using the word sentient. It's one thing to pass the Turing test, but it's another to say it's sentient. Isn't it?
No, to me, no, not at all. To me, and this may seem odd, but it is deeply philosophical, and I'm very confident in my point of view. The only measurement we have, the only thing we need is the Turing test. If something passes that, you have to regard it as sentient and intelligent.
Because it appears
Because how else
human.
would you measure it? Yeah. If you can't, you literally, people, not just you, but like repeatedly in this experiment, we conduct this with all ages, all genders, anybody can come in and talk to the machines, and nobody can tell the difference between the algorithm and the person. That thing is sanctioned. deserving of rights and things like that. It thinks.
All right. So, those are synonymous to you. Whereas for me, fooling someone into making it believing you are human or it is human is different than sentience. Sentience is an awareness in my mind to the fact that you're a robot. But I suppose if we are rating it on the quality of its inputs and outputs, then yeah, it could appear sentient. It would appear sentient. So, you have to have some kind of grading function there. And the grading, I guess what you're saying is the grading function is the Turing test, the inputs and outputs of what it can produce to make it seem human.
Yeah. And also, to me, there's no gradient. There is a binary distinction here. A machine capable of passing this test, I believe, would ipso facto be sentient, that you could not pass this test without bearing the property of sentience.
Okay. And so I would go back to what we were speaking about earlier, that if this person, Lemoyne, believed that this was sentient, well, why didn't he release all of it? A bigger chat. Why didn't he release an hour-long chat, uninterrupted?
Something more convincing, yeah.
I mean,
he brought evidence, whether he should or not, whether he had the legal right or whatever. Like, you brought us some pretty blurry UFO photos, dude.
Right, exactly. He brought the blurry UFO photos, which aren't enough, though interesting, and it shows you the state of the art when it comes to conversational AI.
I would say you see the state of the art of a human performing with a conversational agent.
What's the difference?
He generated the conversation he set out to generate.
Ah, okay. Right. So he had a goal in mind to discuss that thing, sentience,
for sure,
and to get that information out of them. But I was impressed.
And if he knows anything about these machines, which he would have to, I would think, to have that job, then he knows more than the average person about how to get the response you want.
Right. And I would still say that from a layperson's perspective, the quality of the back and forth was compelling. Now, I don't know what the state of the art is. I don't know if there's better.
Well, so there's no official measurement for this sort of thing. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. There are certain data sets, like the question and answering CFAR data set and that kind of thing. Probably this would beat BERT. It would probably beat GPT-3, that kind of stuff. Fair to say this is, if not state of the art, in the class of best in class kind of thing. That this area is moving and changing quickly. But yeah, that's probably considered state of the art. Yeah.
I clearly thought it wasn't evidence of sentience, which is an easy one.
Not even close.
And you clearly thought as well. If we project out in the future, Ray Kurzweil says the singularity, which for people who don't know is when effectively we get artificial general intelligence and compute power exceeds that of the human brain, and we can effectively mimic a human brain, right? Is that fair to say, roughly?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that is supposed to occur in, 8 more years? 7.5 now?
Something like that, yeah.
All right. So where do you stack up there in terms of your opinion about, let's just say, when we can pass the Turing test? Is it going to be in 2030?
I'm hoping it occurs in my lifetime. That's my official position.
For those who don't know, Kyle has a lot of life left in him.
Well, I'm 41, we'll see.
I mean, that's a pretty good amount of life. So what you're saying is
hopefully.
Likely not in the next 7.5 years.
No, plausibly in my lifetime.
Right. Okay.
The problem is there's a lot of things that are unclear. For example, we don't know the full roadmap. There are aspects about, like, the mission to the moon. So many innovations had to happen to figure out how to do it, but they had all the physics they needed. They knew, like, all right, we have to just generate this much thrust. How do we do that? That's a chemistry problem and all that. But they knew the equations. There are open questions we don't fully understand as computer scientists about what even is AI or how do we get to it. And it could be that these amazing tools we're developing today, deep learning and transformers and all these variants, that maybe these are a staircase to the moon. I don't think so. I think we're on the right track. I don't think there's going to be some revolution, but we don't know. That's what makes the forecast hard.
For the general populace, when people think of artificial intelligence, they're not thinking at this. They're thinking at such a large scale compared to what you and I might think of. When people think of artificial intelligence in their daily lives, they're thinking of a smart robot that they can have a conversation with.
Probably.
Something like
Sure.
that. Like, you've got a helper robot. It doesn't have to look perfectly human, but it has to feel like you're having a conversation with it.
It better do what I tell it to.
Or it does what it does what I tell it to do, and it could be natural language, and you know, it's capable of taking out tasks or doing tasks. I think that what when I hear that description to where it's going to affect the daily lives of people while they know it, they know that this is AI. I think we're a very long way off from that. I think there's going to be AI creeping in from all these different angles, and you're not going to be aware of it. It's just going to be part of your life, and it's levered on the back end of certain applications and things you use. But to say that we're going to get to a point where we have humans interacting with AI in like a conversational way,
General purpose.
general purpose, right? We're so far off from that. There are so many dominoes that have to fall to even get there. Energy.
But special purpose AI.
Yeah.
If you want to just put that word in front, you can already claim victory on your prediction because I mean, like voice to text, image recognition, these things are ubiquitous. We all have them, and people don't necessarily appreciate how those things didn't exist 10 years ago.
That's right. That's right. And we'll continue to see, and like you said, it's a staircase. What we have to have this low level research done and improvements to these very small pieces of the larger puzzle before we can get to this fully autonomous, very intelligent general application artificial intelligence, right? And we're just not there. The staircase has got another 500 steps to go, and we've just gone through 20 of them at this point. Like it's infancy in a lot of ways.
I mean, there could be things that move quickly and rapid changes. Certainly, that's a quality our world has taken on, in recent times, but not so rapid that we won't see them coming. Without a doubt, the first artificial general intelligence that's created, it'll have been done on purpose. It's not going to happen for the first time on accident.
Oh, yeah. And then there'll be years of figuring out how to make use of that general artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah, lots and lots of questions once that happens.
Right.
I'm going to retire at that point. I'll just sit back and watch. I'm just trying to get us there.